Today we're going to be in the 14th chapter of First Chronicles, and we're going to see something interesting. We're going to see a new King David on the throne, and God begins to bless him with victories in spite of the fact that David, right out of the chute, is not perfect. And it should give us encouragement that God is capable and willing to bless us even when we blow it. And we'll talk about that today when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study, how to mark it, how to dig deep, and how to apply it to yourself. I'm here with my friend Kyle Grinstead, and Kyle and I are going to continue in our study in First Chronicles. And today we're going to be in the 14th chapter, and we're going to be looking at a very interesting aspect of David's kingdom. We started last week moving into this idea of David as a new king of all of Israel and how God begins to bless him and move this idea of studying the messianic line through the person of David. Today we're going to see God's sovereign blessing even when David's not being totally faithful. We'll see that today as we go. All right, so let's get it right into this, starting at verse 1. Now, we see some interesting things between verse 1 and verse 2, but let's just read verse 1.
Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David with cedar trees, masons, and carpenters to build a house for him. And David realized that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that his kingdom was highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel.
Now, a couple of things here. Where is Tyre?
Is it north of Israel?
It's way north of Jerusalem. It's above the Sea of Galilee over on the coast. Tyre and Sidon are over there on the north side of Israel. And Tyre is the capital of the Phoenician nation. And Hiram is the Phoenician king. And what we see in this verse, where he sends David a gift of cedar trees, because up there in that area it was abundant with cedar trees. They were known. Right now it's the cedars of Lebanon. That's up above, right there. So he sends him cedar trees, and he sends him craftsmen to build a house for David, a palace, basically.
Okay.
Now, what is significant about that is interesting. And we'll see that if we do a little investigation. This relationship with the Phoenicians started with David and this gift of cedar trees, masons, and carpenters to build a house for him. If you flip over to 2 Chronicles, chapter 2, verse 3.
Okay. Then Solomon sent word to Hiram, the king of Tyre, saying, as you dealt with my father David and sent him cedars to build him a house to live in, do it for me.
Okay, and then read verse 8 and verse 9.
Send me also cedar, juniper, and algum timber from Lebanon, for I know that your servants know how to cut timber of Lebanon, and indeed my servants will work with your servants to prepare timber in abundance for me, for the house which I am about to build will be great and wonderful.
Now that's Solomon, David's son, going to build the temple. And the first thing he does is go back to Dad's old friend, the Phoenicians, and get them to send cedars and other exotic woods. And he admits, your craftsmen really know how to work wood. And that starts with this relationship when David first becomes king and receives this gift from the Phoenicians up in Lebanon area.
Cool.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And that relationship continues on to the son and the building of the temple. So we have here the building of the house. Now, verse 2, back in this chapter, David realized that the Lord had established him as king over Israel. What about Hiram's gift made him realize that he was established as the king of Israel?
Oh, he's being recognized now even by foreign nations as having power.
Okay. And the recognition was that he needed a palace. Now, in the culture of the day, a powerful king always had a magnificent palace. And the fact that the Phoenicians gave him a gift to build a fabulous palace, he realized he had finally arrived. The Lord had anointed him king over Israel because he was
Yeah.
finally going to be a king like other kings. He was going to have a palace.
Okay.
Okay. Now, that is significant for just a few verses, and I'll come back to this in a second. So, the fact that he was going to be like other kings and have a palace, he realized that the Lord had put him as king. Now, read the second half of that verse. The Lord had established him over as king over Israel, and then read the part I've got underlined in red.
And that his kingdom was highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel.
Now, did God highly exalt the kingdom of David because David was a good guy?
No, it's ultimately for the nation, it sounds like.
Okay, so basically, he is saying, I am blessing David and his kingdom for the sake of fulfilling a covenant to God's people, to Israel. So all of the blessing of David and the establishment of the line of Messiah that we're going to track is for the sake of the nation of Israel. It's not to make David a big deal,
Okay.
although he is a big deal because he is the progenitor of the Messiah and he is an anointed king by God. But he is not the point of the line of Messiah. Messiah was not to bless David, it was to bless Israel and ultimately the world. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And you see that kind of side comment in the writer of Chronicles that makes the point that David realized he was king and had been established as king, and that his kingdom was highly exalted for the purpose of blessing the people of Israel. Do you see that there? Now, the next verse makes a big point that we very easily miss. Read verse 3.
Then David took more wives at Jerusalem, and David became the father of more sons and daughters.
Now we know that David had 4 sons when he was the king of Hebron, when he was a kind of a sub king. He wasn't the king of Israel, but he was a king over a small domain in Hebron. And he had 4 sons. Here we see a comment that he marries a bunch more women and has a whole bunch more sons. In fact, he has 13 sons
Okay.
by these women in Jerusalem. Now, why is that significant to me? Why do you think that jumps out?
Was it a contrast between it seems like God is blessing David, but then he does what he shouldn't. He takes a lot of wives.
Okay. Now, I want you to flip over to the book of Deuteronomy. This is Moses writing in the law what's going to happen when God chooses a king. Now, remember, last chapter we talked about how the first king, Saul, the people chose, but God has chosen David. Now, the law has some specific instructions for David, and one of those instructions is Deuteronomy 17:17. Go ahead and read it.
And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, so that his heart does not turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself.
Okay, so it's not about becoming wealthy, and it's not about marrying a bunch of women who worship other gods, because that's going to lead you down. Now, Solomon, one of David's sons from Hebron, he notices what dad has done. So when he's king, what does he do?
Same thing.
Same thing, like father, like son. And this is not pleasing to God. When you say, okay, early on, Abraham had a number of wives, but God blessed only the one wife with Sarah. And then came the law through Moses after Abraham. And the law said the king should not take a bunch of wives. David, when he does that, he violates the law of God. Now, why would he do that? Why do you think he takes a bunch of wives?
Maybe that's what's expected of kings in that day.
Exactly like the fact that he had a palace. He realized, hey, I'm a king like all these other kings that have palaces. Now I'm a king. I should have a bunch of wives like all these other kings do, a harem.
Yeah.
So even though he's an anointed man of God, that God is going to use for an amazing thing, he's not a perfect man and he blows it. And yet God is going to show that he is sovereign even when David is not being faithful and obeying. God is still in control and still able to bless the nation through David.
Wow.
Okay? So we see some interesting things happening there. Next, we see these sons. In verse 4, we got a bunch of names, but I don't have to go through them. We got 13 sons. And I want to point out 2 sons that were born in Jerusalem. You have all these sons, plus Nathan is one, and Solomon. Nathan is named for his friend and prophet, the prophet Nathan. You remember it was Nathan that straightened out David when he was messing around with Bathsheba. Remember that? And then Solomon is another son. Now, one of the sons that's born to him in Hebron is Absalom. So he is going to create problems. And I think one of the things we see is that David never has peace in his family. He's always got problems with his kids. He has problems with Absalom. He has problems with Solomon later. And he does not have a blessed family life. We see he treats Absalom incorrectly, and as a result, it blows up in his face. He has a tendency to not have a great relationship with his kids. And I see that's part of this idea of he has all these kids outside of the correct obedience to God's word in the law. See what I'm saying?
Interesting. Yeah. So part of the consequence of that, maybe.
Yeah. Now, what I like about the fact that Nathan and Solomon are mentioned is because they are significant in the line of Messiah. And I want to show you a couple notes here. It says, okay, these are the names of the children born to him, verse 4, born to him in Jerusalem. And one of those is Nathan and one of those is Solomon. Now, Nathan is significant because Nathan shows up in the lineage of the Messiah through Mary. If you go, we won't turn there, but if you go over to Luke chapter 3, verse 31, when Luke is giving the genealogy of Mary, he talks about Mary being related to the Messiah through Nathan. And then Solomon is in the line of Messiah through Joseph. If you turned over to Matthew chapter 1, verse 6, Joseph's line, still related to Messiah, related back to David, but through Solomon, where Mary's line is through Nathan. So Mary and Joseph are cousins, distant cousins, through these 2 individuals that are mentioned here in this verse. Interesting.
Yeah.
And if you look, those 13 sons are mentioned in chapter 3, verse 1 through 8, same 13 guys, plus the 6 from Hebron. It ends up with David had 19 sons and a couple of daughters. And this idea of too many wives, God is still going to use David. He's still sovereign over the situation, but he never lets David have peace in his family because David's family is not founded on obedience to the scriptures. Okay? Now, if we look, let's go back and pick up at verse 8. We're going to see some more interesting things. This is a section on the victories that he has over the Philistines. In fact, I want you to read verse 8 and 9.
Okay. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all Israel, all the Philistines went up in search of David, and David heard of it and went out against them. Now the Philistines had come and made a raid in the valley of Rephaim.
Now, a couple things. Why immediately, when the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all Israel, why do they attack? Why do they come looking for David?
I don't know.
What's the history of the Philistines and Israel?
Not great relationship.
That's right. Now, 100 years before David, the Philistines were the ones that took the Ark of the Covenant captive and took it away from Israel 100 years before. So they've been enemies for 100 years. And it was the Philistines that David, when he's a young guy, he kills Goliath, who's from Gath, which is part of the Philistine kingdom, and defeats the champion of the Philistines, right?
Yeah.
And then the Philistines later, when he's an outlaw from Saul, the Philistines love it because they hire David and his 600-man army to attack Israel, and David doesn't. In fact, he guards Israel. So when he's a king in Hebron, the Philistines think he's still a vassal king. He's still faithful to them because they've hired him and given him sanctuary. They gave him the city of Ziklag was given to David by the Philistines. So all of a sudden, they attack because of this note. He becomes anointed to be king over all Israel. So now he's no longer a vassal king of some little place. He is the anointed king of all of Israel, and Israel is the enemy.
Okay.
So immediately, the Philistines come looking for David. You see that?
Yeah.
And they attack in the valley of Rephaim. Now, where is that?
I'm not sure.
See, we got to be careful. We have a tendency to read the scriptures and we just leave some stuff. It doesn't matter. The valley of Rephaim is, okay, fine. And if we stop and do a Bible study and really look at some of these places, the scriptures really become alive. And the scriptures are no longer just this fantasy story, but they're facts from places that actually happen. In fact, a lot of archaeologists go to the Bible and they look at these places and they say, that's where I'm going to go dig. And they find all these places that are in the scriptures. So one of the things I recommend is you use an atlas. I want to zoom in here and show you. This is the battle that he's describing. The Philistines, here's David over in Jerusalem. Do you see that?
Yep.
Okay. And here's Philistia over here where the Philistines are, and Gath, this area that has a lot of experience with David. And they come through Gath and they go to Baal Perazim, which is in the valley of Rephaim. So the valley of Rephaim is just southeast of the city of Jerusalem, right here.
Okay.
So you have that. Now, let's go back to these verses because you're going to see they come in that orange line. The Philistines come in and attack in the valley of Rephaim, and we're going to see this Baal Perazim come into effect. Now watch this. Let's pick up at verse 10 and go down to verse 12.
Okay. David inquired of God, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines, and you will give them into my hand? Then the Lord said to him, go up, for I will give them into your hand. So they came up to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. And David said, God has broken through my enemies by my hand, like the breakthrough of waters. Therefore they named that place Baal Perazim.
Baal Perazim basically means the master of breakthrough. And breakthrough means like a dam breaks and I come in and I sweep them away.
Okay.
That's why it's called Baal Perazim, because he defeated, and that word defeated means he literally smote them. Okay. So David comes in and he gets a victory. Now, watch what happens. Now, a couple things. In verse 10, the first thing David does when he sees the Philistines are coming, is he inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines? Now, if you went, we don't have to turn there, but if you go to 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 8, when the Amalekites attack Ziklag, where he lived, the first thing he does is David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Amalekites? So this was a habit David had of,
Okay.
there's a battle coming, so I'm going to pray and ask the Lord if I should go to the battle and if you're going to give me victory. We see a habit there. And God says, I will give them into your hand, and they get a huge victory, right? I want you to notice, and I want you to ask, why is verse 12 there? They come in and they have a big victory. And read verse 12.
They abandoned their gods there, so David gave the order and they were burned with fire.
Now, why not just say they were completely defeated like a dam bursting? And that's why I called it that. Why verse 12 that says that the Philistines abandoned their idols when they ran and David burns them? Why would put that in?
I don't know.
Who abandoned their idols?
The
Who is it?
Philistines.
The Philistines. And 100 years earlier, the Philistines defeated an army from Israel, and the army deserted the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay.
Okay? So basically, this is under David, he's going to defeat the people who earlier took the abandoned Ark of the Covenant that Israel gave up when they lost the battle with the Philistines. So it's just an interesting way that the chronicler is bringing things full circle.
Yeah.
With the Philistines. And then we go on. After that little comment, David makes this point of taking away their gods, and the Philistines made yet another raid. Now, verse 13 makes a point that the victory that they had in Baal Perazim is not a total defeat. It's just a battle that's won.
Okay.
Because the Philistines still have enough to come back for another raid in the valley of Rephaim. Okay?
Okay.
So they're still fighting. And David inquires again of the Lord, as his habit was, shall I go after them? And God said to him, you shall not go after them, but circle around behind them and at the front of the balsam trees. Now, there's a little number here for balsam trees, that the word in the original Hebrew is basically baka shrubs. They're not really trees. They're what became known and what we translate into English as balsam trees, but they're really just very bushy, big bushes.
Okay.
Now that's significant for us to know what the next verse says. Now, he says, go, don't attack them front on, go behind them and wait in these big shrubs.
Okay.
And then read verse 15.
It shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees that you shall go out to battle, for God will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines.
Now, if you're not paying attention, that verse doesn't make any sense. How do you hear an army marching in the tops of the balsam trees? Armies don't go through the tops of trees.
Yeah.
And how should they hear an army that's doing that? But it makes sense if you know that the balsam trees really means these shrubs. Because when the army is marching through these shrubs, it makes noise.
Okay.
And it's literally marching through the tops of all these shrubs that are these balsam trees. And he says, you'll hear them and know right where they are and go out to battle, for God will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines. There's some interesting things there that tactically, an army that's hip deep in shrubbery is not really a good fighting force.
Yeah.
So they're wading through this thicket of shrubs, and God says, that's when you attack them. and I'm going to give you victory because I've set that up. So now you don't have to do a frontal attack. You just wait to literally ambush them in the bush. Bad pun. Sorry. Okay. But anyway, that's this idea that all of a sudden that verse makes sense if you've dug a little bit into that little number 2 that says that balsam tree is actually just a big bush. Okay.
Yeah.
And that really clarifies what that verse means. Now go ahead and read the last 2 verses.
David did just as God had commanded him, and they struck down the army of the Philistines from Gibeon even as far as Gezer. Then the fame of David went out into all the lands, and the Lord brought the fear of him on all the nations.
Now, interesting things here. Again, he gets victory because he does as God had commanded him. But we saw when it came to marrying women, he didn't do all that God commanded him.
Yeah.
So now we see a contrast. Now he's really being obedient, and God is giving him victories that's going to make an impact on the nation of Israel. And it says that he gets a victory from Gibeon to Gezer. And you go, okay, where is that? And this is where I want to show you one more time on a map. It just helps bring it alive. When you see, let's zoom in here. Here's Valley of Rephaim. He comes down, they attack again. And this time he comes down from Jerusalem, right here, and he gets a victory, and he chases them from Gibeon all the way across here to Gezer, which is over in Philistia.
Okay.
So he basically gets a victory and chases them out of the area through a northern route.
Yeah.
And it's just neat to know these places are real. This is not an imaginary battle. This really happened. David gets victory. God blesses him, and he gets victory, and he runs the Philistines out of the country. And then there's one last little phrase that I want to show you. As a result of this victory, verse 17, the fame of David went out into all the lands, and the Lord brought the fear of him on all the nations. Notice, David does not bring the fear of David on all the nations.
Yeah.
The Lord brings the fear of David on all the nations. So they go, oh, wow, David. We've seen some interesting archaeology from kings that are not even in the Bible that say, we fought against the house of David. David was feared in the region as the power because God had ordained it to be, and God had given the fear of David to the nations. Not because David was so hot, but because God put that fear into them. So there again, we come back to that full circle where God blesses David for the sake of Israel. And God makes the nations around them fear for the sake of Israel. And then later, when they're coming out of the captivity, which is the chronicler is writing about that, they can say, we know that God is capable of giving us victory as we rebuild Jerusalem and the nation. And God is capable of putting fear of Israel into the nations that are coming against us.
Wow.
So it really relates back to guys coming out of the captivity, wondering about what's going to happen as they rebuild Jerusalem. Make sense?
Yeah.
You see, well, it's an interesting chapter in that we see, yes, this new king, but the new king right away blows it by disobeying God's word. Yet God is sovereign for the sake of the covenant with Israel, the covenant to produce a Messiah. He is still sovereign over that and doesn't let David's sin blow it for the plan he has for Israel and even the plan he has for David to overcome. Now, that should be encouraging to us in that if I sinned, we as New Testament believers know we can confess that. But just because I sinned does not mean God will not continue to be sovereign over his plan for my life.
Yeah, it's encouraging.
And that should be encouraging to us. Well, today we've been talking about God's control over the situation, even when the king, David, is not being that great at following his instructions. And this is an example of the sovereignty of God. And I want to recommend a video to you. It's called Open Doors, Free Will, and God's Sovereignty. Thought of a series I did about how to determine God's will for your life. And I think you'll enjoy it. If you do, hit the subscribe button and the like. That helps us with YouTube. And listen, we're going to continue in our study next week. And until then, God bless you.